For the last 50 years, American children have increasingly been living in a toxic soup of synthetic chemicals.
That was FDA Commissioner Vani Hari explaining that much of our food and our food that kids eat really isn't food at all. It's poison. The bright rainbow in Fruit Loops and breakfast isn't really breakfast. It's sugar laced with harmful petroleum and synthetic dyes as additives. The FDA banned red dye number 3 earlier this year because of the health risks posed. But OAN's Katie Smith explained to us that the FDA's ban at that time did not go far enough.
Almost seems like it's something to distract us from the other chemicals that are in our foods or the other dyes that are in our food that actually make up way more percentage than just the red 3. So that red 3 could get replaced with red 40 if they don't act on that either.
HHS Secretary RFK Jr. seems to have heeded that call. He announced Tuesday that the FDA will work with the food companies to phase out a handful of artificial dyes by the end of next year.
We're going to get rid of the dyes, and then one by one, we're going to get rid of every ingredient and additive in food that we can legally address.
The FDA has stopped short of an all-out ban for now, but Kennedy said the food industry has voluntarily agreed to phase out these 6 specific petroleum-based dyes. Now, the FDA is also taking steps to pull the authorization of 2 other colors, citrus red number 2 and orange B. Joining me now, New York Times bestselling author of The Food Babe Way and founder of Truvani, Vani Hari. So, Vani, what has you there at the White House working to make sure we're all healthy?
Well, we had an incredible announcement coming out of HHS yesterday and the head of the FDA that they are going to require food manufacturers to remove artificial food dyes by the end of next year. Immediately, they're going to be looking at revoking access to 2 food dyes that haven't been widely used, and then looking at regulatory measures for 6 others within 18 months. This is the first real, honest legislation and regulation coming out of the FDA in years. For over a decade, I have been saying the FDA is asleep at the wheel, and now I can no longer say that. It is absolutely incredible to see what this administration is accomplishing.
If someone didn't know how food dyes could harm them, what would you want them to be educated on?
Yeah, really, it was stunning watching the FDA commissioner, Dr. Vani Hari, talk about the health risks associated with these artificial food dyes. He wants to err on the side of safety, the precautionary principle. This is something they've been doing in so many other countries. These same food companies have removed artificial food dyes for their products that they sell in other countries, but not here in the United States, using these poisonous ingredients here made from petroleum and coal tar. These are linked to neurological issues, cancer, GI issues. In Europe, it requires a warning label, a cigarette-type warning label that says may cause adverse effects on activity and attention in children. And when the food manufacturers found out that these dyes caused these issues 15 years ago, they reformulated their products for other countries, but didn't do that for the United States. And I think this is extremely hypocritical. It's a double standard. And today, the FDA has said they're putting their foot down and a stake in the ground that these dyes are no longer deemed safe. You need to remove them if you're part of this food industry. And if you don't, we're going to be putting regulatory measures in place. So you have to comply.
You're so right that it is hypocritical. Why do you think the United States for so long has been so far behind Europe on just regulating these bad chemicals that poison us out of existence?
Unfortunately, our regulatory agencies have been captured by industry, and there's just extreme conflicts of interest that have existed within these regulatory bodies, with the amazing leadership of President Trump and Secretary Kennedy looking at getting the swamp out of these regulatory agencies. It's absolutely exciting to see that we're going to return to a trustful regulatory agency and return to why the FDA was created, and the fact that, the F in the FDA stands for food, and food is medicine. And so we've got to look at the root root cause of why we are so sick, why we have the highest rates of chronic disease, but we spend the most on health care. We need to do something radical here, which is basically look at the common sense principles that so many other nations have done with their food. We need to simplify our ingredients. We need to return to real food. Just simply telling Americans eat more whole, real food will have a fundamental impact on our health. You know, when you look at why Red 3 took so long to ban, it was banned in cosmetics over 30 years ago, but Biden administration was hurrying trying to get that ban in before the next administration because of incredible pressure from our grassroots MAHA movement. Red 3 was actually, lobbied by the maraschino cherry industry along with the alcohol industry to remain in food, even though it caused cancer, because the little red cherries made alcoholic sales more profitable for that industry at the bar. So this is the kind of back dealings that are happening to keep these cancerous substances in our food supply when really we should be removing them.
I am never letting my producer have a maraschino cherry in his Manhattan ever again after hearing that from you. But your diagnosis is exactly correct, that it is a function of corruption, that the entities that were supposed to be protecting us were actually protecting the interests of the people who are making a profit poisoning us. And it makes me wonder, what do you think American society and public health would look like today if we had never ingested these chemicals en masse?
You know, we wouldn't have a regulatory agency with a gaping hole that allows these food companies to approve chemicals without any third-party review. It's the reason why we have over 10,000 chemicals allowed for use in the United States here, where they're in countries in Europe, it's only 400. We would have a level playing field with the rest of the world in terms of our chronic disease rates instead of having the worst. I mean, the fact that 38% of preteens are now pre-diabetic when it used to be 0 is unacceptable. We have to look at the root cause of why we are so sick, and it starts, again, with our food.
And I want to talk about how corporate interests have reacted to the work you're doing there at the White House right now and that Secretary Kennedy is doing with HHS. We have seen a number of corporations come along and voluntarily move some of these dyes out of their product, but it does sort of seem to me like it's get this stuff out or else. That the food companies can either voluntarily get the poison out of the food or Secretary Kennedy will take a more aggressive action. What can you tell us about corporate food's response and whether or not they're going to come along willingly with what needs to happen to improve public health?
Well, I think it's both. They're asking them to voluntarily remove it and saying it's going to be followed up with with regulation. So there's going to be it's a two-part step. So that's important to understand. The other thing that is important to understand is these food industry giants have not wanted to do this because it's cheaper for them to use a petroleum-based dye than real ingredients, natural ingredients. But when you look back at what happened in Europe when they had to make these changes to avoid that warning label, the products did not increase in price. It maybe was a cent here and there, but it wasn't anything meaningful. The food companies need to put people over profits, and that's what we're demanding in this administration.
Final question for you. Again, you're there hard at work right now. What's next for the MAHA movement to keep up this tremendous momentum that you have with Secretary Kennedy?
Well, there's an incredible amount of chemicals that are allowed in food beyond dyes that we have to look at and look at post-market review and the safety studies associated with them. There's a couple of them that are on my radar. Titanium dioxide, that's already been banned in Europe. It causes DNA damage. You can find it in Skittles and icing and ice cream here in the United States. There's dimethyl polysiloxane, an ingredient that you would find in formaldehyde that can be preserved with formaldehyde according to the FDA. And this is an ingredient that McDonald's uses in their French fries here as an anti-foaming agent, but they don't use in other countries. So, my fight has always been about if the American food companies can make their products with safer, better ingredients for other citizens, they should be doing that for Americans, and maybe Americans first, for that matter. I mean, goodness gracious, the fact that they've been poisoning us for all of these years while selling other countries better ingredients. Secretary Kennedy said something so profound during a Senate roundtable that I was part of. He said, if another nation was doing this to us, it would be considered an act of war.
Vani Hari, thank you so much for your work there at the White House and for keeping us informed on the great progress in the MAHA movement.
Thank you so much, Matt.